Alrighty, so here we are for the debate capitalism is immoral. I apologize for any technical issues that we were having before. My modem dropped out just as we were about to start, and this is the first debate I've done using this client before, so it's a little bit unfamiliar with me, but I think we're good and ready to go now. Alrighty, so this is necessarily a bit of a broad debate, given that terms like capitalism and immoral can kind of come to mean a couple of different things depending on people's definitions of it. So just in doing a little bit of setting up for this debate, I'm going to sort of outline what I think is characteristic of capitalism and what is characteristic of an immoral system. And if you have any disagreements about what either of those things are, feel free to integrate that into your arguments and I will respond accordingly. So to me, capitalism can be defined by an economic system that is defined by basically three things. First off being the free market, any kind of market that people are engaged in without sort of any intervention from states or other kind of actors apart from corporations or other individuals acting within that market. The second thing I'd say it's defined by is respect for people's rights to be entirely self-interested, that capitalism necessarily means that people can look out for themselves and not have to necessarily worry about the costs of their actions or having to bring about some sort of social good, that if you're able to generate profit for yourself, then that's something that you're completely able to do under the system. And the third thing that I would say that defines capitalism is a sense of universal commoditization, that everything can have a value, and that value is defined by the market, by what people are willing to pay for it. So the value of something like a rainforest is however much people are willing to pay to buy the land off whoever currently owns it, and the value that can be extracted from that is whatever value that is extracted by people, processing that timber into resources and whatnot. What I would say is immoral of an economic system is that if a system incentivizes actions that in itself are immoral, so if within acting as this system intends you to do, you perform actions that are immoral, then I would think that extends to the larger system being immoral in and of itself. If a system necessitates that immoral deeds need to be done in order to self-preserve itself, then that system is characteristically immoral. And that if a system simply causes suffering by necessary of its own existence, then that also is an immoral system. So with that in mind, I have four arguments for why I think that capitalism is immoral. The first argument being is that primarily is a system that its goal is to generate profit, and it has no checks and balances for any kind of externalities or suffering that it causes on behalf of making those profits. So a quick example of this would be seen that, in the production of iPhones and other consumer electronic goods, that in order for that to happen, the minerals need to be mined by people in Africa that are often working under slave-like conditions and then put in, factories where people live very, very unhappy lives, also that Apple can make a profit in order to be able to sell these iPhones to the rest of the consumers. That there are no checks and balances for being able to stop that as long as people can make a profit on while other people suffer, then that's totally okay under capitalism. The second argument I would say is that it highlights most viscerally the tragedy of the commons that exists in the world, where we see things currently like oceans are being overfished, forests are being cleared, the atmosphere is being polluted, and CO2 levels are going up that is causing global warming. All of these arguably are a result of corporations acting in their own self-interests to try to generate profit, insofar as that, they have a large incentive to pollute the atmosphere and other things because those things are very profitable to them in order to produce the things that they need to do. And there's nothing to stop them and no incentive for them to care about the damages that they're causing to the environment and subsequently those damages that they're causing to future generations that this will affect. My third argument largely is that it heightens inequality between systems. Now, while I'm willing to accept that some amount of inequality in a system is fine and perhaps even necessary in some things, I think that inequality, that means people doing very, very well at the price of other people suffering, is clearly immoral. And that I think that our first concern as a society would be to get everyone up to a base level where no one is suffering. And then any inequality that comes about that is probably fine. And then my fourth argument, which is probably the least important of that, is that if we look at capitalism as it kind of exists in a sort of modern consumerist culture, it actually exists out of making other people unhappy. That in order to be able to sell something to someone, in order to create a consumer, you need to create a need for that consumer. And that need is created by telling people that their lives are not good, that they're not happy, and that they will become happy as long as they buy the newest thing that is on offer. So those are the basic outline of my four arguments. I'll offer further analysis as we go on. But for now, it's over to you.
Okay. Yeah, I guess this is not the this is the self-moderated version. Hear me all right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the other format, you have to pass them out. So thank you for that intro. So my position is that is moral, or it's not immoral. So the reason why, there's a few reasons why. So there's a few different market systems that have been put in place in the world over time. In economic systems, there's a traditional, where kind of like in Africa or in Africa, where there are countries that people are just doing bartering, they have basic resources, not really much of a economy. Then you have a command centralized government. They're forcing the market. They are controlling the markets themselves. They're regulating what you can eat, what you can do, sort of like communism. They dictate everything that the market produces. They control all the resources. And then you have a market economy where either it's free market capitalism or socialism. Even though they're kind of different, socialism and capitalism are similar in the sense that the government is letting the market decide. With socialism, the government is dictating some of the resources, and then capitalism, the market decides everything. So in and of itself, and the other one is mixed, where it's either a mixture of command and market, where the government controls certain instances, like the post office in America. Free markets don't control that. So where it lies is capitalism is moral, because if you don't create value in an economy, you're not going to get customers. You're not going to make people happy. So, for example, you said that if people are making people unhappy and then trying to solve a need, a lot of those businesses fail after a few years because people are realizing that need is not really what they need. It's just like it's not filling a need. It's trying to make something that's not there. So when you said that basic rights, so I agree that free market capitalism, totally left unchecked, would be a bad thing. So in a free market society, you would need to have checks and balances. For example, the free markets, it should have like different organizations overseeing different entities. Like, for example, you're saying overusing of resources. So when, say there's a limited amount of rainforest, in capitalism, in true capitalism, there is oversight in terms of the markets dictating, you know what, if we use all those rainforests up, we're not going to have any more rainforests to make a profit from. And thus they go out of business. So the market wants to correct itself. It takes a little longer than in a command market situation, but in the end of the day, it's going to be much better because people feel more free to do what they want. So, yeah, I find that capitalism is moral because, you know, if you're not making people happy with your value, adding value to their lives, they have nothing to give money to. So right now in America, we're more of a mixed system between a market and a command. So when the government, say the bailout for Ford and Chrysler back in when the bubble hit, the government took away all the tax money from the taxpayers and said, you know what, you're a failing business, we like you, you pay our political donations, then we're going to bail you out, even though they're not creating value in the system. And that's not free market capitalism. And everyone's like, why am I paying Chrysler and Ford and GM for a failing product that we didn't want to buy? So in my opinion, that's more immoral than me saying, you know what, Ford, you should go out of business because you're not creating value. So that's where I say. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll totally agree with you that instances of the government bailing out corporations are failing, as the examples that you gave with car companies. We can also point to the financial crash and the global financial crisis for all of the Wall Street banks got paid out. I think is just a clear example of total corruption. That I will absolutely agree with you that that is not an appropriate intervention for states to act. Couple of comments on the things that you said. So the first thing that you disputed was that if corporations try to create a need that isn't there, that they're quickly going to fail within a free market society because people will realize that that need is not there, and fail to engage within that market. I have a couple of examples that I think sort of disprove that point. The first would very clearly just be the makeup industry and any other kind of sort of beauty industry. There's no, we've been wearing makeup as, humanity for quite some time. But the exact sort of specifics that get promoted by the beauty industry are often in many times entirely manufactured by advertisements and by campaigns to convince people that this is what they need, right? Like the most, Olay comes out with this thing that says, stop the 7 signs of aging. 7 signs of aging don't exist, right? That's entirely a marketing gimmick to try to convince women that they are grown old and that this is a bad thing that they should be very scared about. And in order to do that, that they will buy their product. And that is sort of what I'm talking about when I say that capitalism creates this unhappiness, right? Is it creates this insecurity in people's life that says you're not good enough. You shouldn't be satisfied with the things that you have. The grass is greener on the other side, and that other side is our products and our wonderful things. Another example that we can point this to is just like the special, like gemstones and diamonds and stuff that goes on jewelry, right? So people think that, diamonds are like these really sort of precious things, but, the diamond market and the jewelry market as it exists is totally artificially inflated by the De Beers Corporation and other people that have a large stake in it. Diamonds as they exist are relatively common. Like we use them in technology in a lot of different places. But corporations that sell these things on the free market artificially restrict the flow of these so that they can inflate the price. In fact, the whole cultural system of the whole cultural convention of giving a diamond ring as an engagement ring was something that didn't happen up until about the 1920s, where there was a De Beers ad corporation that said, this is a thing that you should do in order to prove to your wife or wife-to-be that you love her. And that was so successful that it stuck in the Western psyche that now it's just become a tradition of things that people do. So I think that capitalism and that the people within capitalism absolutely have the power to create value, to create social norms, to convince people that they want things that without that they actually wouldn't want in the first place.
Well, you're saying that you just said it yourself, they're creating value. So for example, with the makeup, right? So a lot of women have that kind of thought that I'm not good enough. So the value in the makeup companies, look, we can make you look a little younger, putting on the right kind of makeup, improve your look. And then with the diamonds, the De Beers, that is the anti-capitalism, the antithesis of capitalism, because they control an entire monopoly on all the diamond mines. And monopolies in a capitalist society don't work out. That's not capitalism. We have a monopoly that it's regulated in Africa that they're the only ones who get it. So that's, you're saying things from other countries that are not capitalism, and you're making them as an L towards capitalism. Even with you're saying an Apple iPhone, they're exploiting. They're not really exploiting the workers because there's people lining up for miles trying to work for Apple and the Foxconn factories because they have no other way to make money in the command-based China. So they're kind of limited to what they can work, so they have to get what they can get. And Foxconn pays them a better wage than most of the other factories that they're making pennies every other day. So I would say that, when you're trying to get resources, when you can exploit the non-capitalist societies, that is not good for the name of capitalism. But in all honesty, in America, if you're creating value, you're going to find someone who wants to buy your product. It might not be the entire market share, but when you're creating value for a number of people and you're raising the capital, you're creating something that they need. and that they willing to part with their hard-earned money that they earned performing service or selling a product. They say, I need this money less than your steak, for example. They go to the supermarket and say, I want 4 steaks. So they give the teller, I'm going to give you $20 for these steaks. The teller, aka the business, values that $20 more than those 4 steaks. So you're both creating value both ways. They've received a steak for their money that they earn, say, mowing the lawn, and then the business can say, you know what, let me put this $20 to buy 6 steaks. So they profited 2 steaks. So they have 6 steaks to sell opposed to only the 4 they sold them. So it works both ways. When everyone is providing value, whether you're a consumer with your dollars, you're voting with your dollars, or you're a business, you're voting with your service or products, everyone wins. It's a win-win, whereas in socialism, for example, government dictates what price you pay. Even if it's totally off for what the value is, people, it just creates unrest saying, why would I give you a steak for $5 when it costs me $7? And in socialism and command-based economies, it just doesn't work out. Everyone feels like, why am I working extra hard to get less value? In capitalism, you only earn what value you create. So if you don't create value, you're not going to go anywhere.
All right. So I guess the point that I would try to re-articulate in talking about the whole conception of value and stuff is that it's my understanding that within a sort of pluralistic, like free market economy, that the market is supposed to try to flip to whatever the value of that society is, that the society itself is dictating the values, and that the market is responding in kind to be able to try to match those values in the way that you talked about with the steaks and other sort of some such. My points in regards to things like the makeup companies and diamonds and stuff is that what I think we see currently is a perversion of that system, where because the companies have so much power, they have so much cultural capital that they're able to leverage through things like advertising and other things like that, that they have in fact created, that they are not necessarily just serving the values of society, that they themselves are able to create their own values that they subsequently sell people onto. So I have no doubt that people, going to the store, buying the makeup are doing so of their own free will and their own volition and paying for it how much they think is reasonable. What I'm saying is that that conception of how much they think is reasonable, how much they think they need it, in itself is created by a system and by a society that convinces them that they need it and convinces them that they're going to face a lot of shame and stigma if they don't, in fact, engage within that. So that's just a couple of thoughts on like the creation of value and things like that. But I think there are some other issues in this debate to talk about, so we might sort of move on. So specifically talking about, just wanted to respond to your thing that you said about overforestation and and deforestation, rainforest, kind of talking about the tragedy of the commons that I brought up earlier. So the comment that you made was something along the lines of that, well, if you have the free market, that the free market will work with some amount of oversight, right? That, so moving away from rainforest, maybe if you take the oceans, right? And just like fishing in general, if you say that, the free market recognizes that if we keep fishing at the rate that we're doing, we're going to overfish the ocean, decimate the populations, and eventually there's just going to be no fish. So actually we need to regulate this or work together in some way to be able to ensure that for the good of that this market can still exist, that that doesn't happen. What I would say as a response to that is that the free market doesn't work like collectively together. The free market is a bunch of corporations and individual businesses working indeed in competition with each other. And there's no real incentive for those businesses to be able to cooperate in a way that enables that kind of oversight in order to happen. Because if you're a person, if you're, say, a fisherman within this system, right, and say, you've come to a collective agreement amongst yourselves that you're only going to fish a certain amount, right? But you suspect that someone else might be breaking that because it's hard to count exactly how many fish are. There's other ways that you can navigate the system. Then you can say, well, if that other person is doing it, we're going to overfish the oceans anyway. So why shouldn't I try to reap in the benefit while I'm still able to. And in fact, there's a large incentive of of wanting to be able to do that. Because if you know that a system is going to be unviable within a couple of years, say the oceans are going to be overfished, then it behests you to try to gain as much capital and as much profit from that system as it's able, so that when that market does shift, then you have the capital to be able to reinvest and restart your business in another market. So if the fisherman knows that in 3 years, fishing is not going to be viable anymore, he better try as hard as he can to make as much money as he possibly can, so that when fishing becomes unviable, that he can reinvest into farming or some other form of food resources. So perhaps you can articulate to me, but I don't really see what this kind of like naturalistic checks and balances situation is that actually prevents this sort of deprivation of common resources. The only one that I can think of would be some sort of state-sanctioned ability. But at that point, the argument that I would provide is that the point that you're getting the state to intervene in free markets, that indicates that the way that that we're moving more away from capitalism and towards more of a socialistic or mixed market economy where the state is intervening when it seems appropriate.
Well, the way I see it, there has to be the free market. So in the past, what the government said, you know what, free markets, you're not regulated. They took a heavy hand, and they came in and regulated the markets. There has to be a calling for free market capitalists to say, you know what, don't need to watch over those greedy people who want to overfish the waters. So if in a true capitalist society, yeah, you're right that everyone's out for themselves. Let me get as much value as I can. But that's where it comes in with education. So, for example, out west in the Grand Canyon, instead of them having really strict laws, if you throw a plastic water bottle on the ground, you go to jail for 50 years or something like that. They find that it's cheaper and much more effective to educate the populace that, you know what, if we litter on this Grand Canyon, that water bottle is going to be there for the next 10,000 years. And next person who does that, you're clogging up the whole Grand Canyon, killing the whole ecosystem. So that goes back to capitalism is not just a product and value. It's also a system where, hey, if I support a cause, I can create value in raising funds to support that cause. For example, Khan Academy, they have free schooling for K through 12. That totally blows the picture up on the command-based, you know what, you have to go to school by this government-rate institution. Khan Academy can give you a better education for free because wealthy capitalists are donating money. So based off of the Bible, there's tithing, which says you should give 10% of your profits to the God. And it's not just no God, it's just sitting in a slush fund. The church then is supposed to do charity work, whether feeding the homeless, building shelters, making sure everyone has a meal, so on and so forth. So the Rockefellers, for example, really big-time capitalists, they attribute their success to tithing, giving at least 10% of their income to charity or to the church. And in a capitalist society, in a working capitalist, not like a pure capitalist, but in a good working capitalist society, people should be encouraged to donate to causes they believe in. In socialism, for example, with paying for Medicare or paying for Social Security, you're forcing people to create value that is not valued. And when the government controls something, they do a terrible job of it. Just like going to the DMV. I went to the post office earlier today. I waited online for a good half hour because, well, just bureaucracy. Where the guy who just came to the the time of the day, you don't do metrics that say, you know what, during the hours of 1 to 5, you get a lot more traffic. We should have another person. you have to have a certain amount of people, a certain amount of hours. The TSA, for example, do a terrible job of regulating themselves. They'll have 100 TSA employees on a Monday and then 20 on a Saturday. Where Monday it's not busy at all, and then on a Saturday it's their big business time of the week. So when the government controls it, you're doing disservice because they have no incentive to create value. So, for example, if private security firms had to be hired by the airlines, they would do a much better job than the government can. Because they would say, you know what, we want to move in and out. We want to give the best customer service. There is no customer service for the TSA. Yeah, there is for some of the post office. The boss, the TSA, because it hasn't caught any terrorists. But in a free market society, in capitalism, people could choose, you know what, I feel safe enough going on that plane without having to get strip searched by the TSA or some creep on in front of everyone in the airport. Or some people want to say, you know what, I would feel safer if everyone on this plane was checked by a security professional. I choose to give my dollar to the airliner that does that. Free market capitalism, you have that perfect choice to do that. When you're controlled by the government and say government bureaucracy, you don't have that opportunity. So I find that capitalism is the most fair and moral part of economics because you don't create value. Even if you're making value, people have the responsibility to say, I want to vote for my dollar in this way and not that way. If you're not you don't take the incentive to educate yourself about finances, you're going to lose. So when I want to be a billionaire, I plan on being a billionaire. If I don't increase my education and learn how the market works, it's not going to work to become a billionaire. Someone's not just going to give me $1 billion. I have to earn it by creating value in the economy.
All right. So yeah, a couple of responses to those things. Firstly, just responding specifically to your claim that free market capitalism offers the best sort of like engagement with the customer service, and the best products because people don't really have incentives to do those things otherwise. I think that, it's fair enough that you can quote some examples like, the TSA and the DMV and all these sorts of things. But I could easily respond and say that I've had similarly terrible customer service interactions with private corporations. For example, anyone who lives in Australia knows that trying to deal with your phone service provider, Optus, is notoriously bad. And that they don't really give you the time of day. Whereas I went to get a license a couple of weeks ago and the process was very speedy and efficient. So I don't really think that it's a basis of government controlled versus free market that actually causes these systems to be good or bad. I think it's just a matter of accountability and of management. And that, so when you have the larger that a corporation gets, and necessarily government, controlled institutes like the TSA and like the DMV kind of are necessarily large because they're kind of tied to the government in that sort of way, you lose that amount of accountability. And whereas, people can give you a really awful customer service experience, and then it doesn't really matter because it doesn't really affect you at the end of the day, which is a similar situation that can happen when corporations get really, really large. In the case of phone service providers, that they're so large that they can afford to treat you not as a good customer, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter or not whether or not you have a good customer experience. So I think that the things that cause those kind of good customer things is just good management, being realistic about the kinds of things that need, and actually having some amount of accountability. And I don't think that necessarily that those things can't exist under a controlled market or a socialistic setting. I think that, in fact, the more democratic engagement that we get, and that perhaps if we were to link specific government agencies to specific government departments and have those held more accountable, that perhaps we could fix a lot of those problems. So I just did a little bit skeptical that necessarily that if you switch to a more controlled style system, that you're always going to get worse customer service, because I think we can see it exists currently. In regards to your second point about, or the first point that you brought up, in regards to like people littering in the Grand Canyon, this whole idea of tithing and how that sort of produces value for people. What I would say there is that that's not exactly an example. That's something that is able to exist under capitalism, but that's not something that's incentivized by capitalism. That's not something that does that kind of really calls into any kind of like capitalistic tendencies in order to bring about. I would say that the reason why a lot of people, donate to charities that they find important is because of sort of personal moral beliefs or personal moral convictions that they think that is in fact important. I think that, when people choose not to litter in the Grand Canyon, it's not because any kind of like economic analysis that this is going to be bad for them. It's because they've been socially pressured and again, held to their own moral beliefs and convictions that is a wrong thing to do, that is insensitive. So I think that, obviously like alternate forces within one's life can pull them to perform different actions. But the specific ones you're referring to, I don't think are indicative of capitalism, because I don't think capitalism offers any incentive for it, in fact, for people to tithe particularly well. Like people in themselves might say, yes, I attribute my success to being a good person and to giving this much amount. But if you look at the economic systems in place, like you're just, losing value as it is conceived within the capitalist system, because instead of giving that money to someone, you could have invested that money somewhere, and then that would have enabled you to create more profit, right? So I think rather than looking at the Rockefellers, a more sort of a different example of a kind of capitalist family at work would be the Waltons, who own Walmart, right? Like this is the example that you constantly get brought up by Bernie Sanders and other people like this, right? This is the family that owns $149 billion, which is like more than 127 million people that exist in America, and they do so while still paying their employees low enough that they have to rely on government subsidies and food stamps from the government. So I guess the real question there is then dictating about whether or not a capitalist society is able to the corporations are able to exist with the capitalist society to look out for the needs of people. My question to you would be that, do you think that the Waltons operating as they do, having huge amounts of wealth while still paying their employees very little, is that a failure of free market capitalism, or is that free market capitalism working how it's supposed to?
Oh, that's exactly how it's supposed to be working. In America alone, Walmart employs 1.4 million people. I just looked this up. So, yes, they pay low wages, but a Walmart employee shouldn't be saying, you know what, this is all I'm good for. And that's all they want to get. You should not be getting a living wage and living at Walmart because they don't have enough value. So if one of those Walmart workers said, you know what, I'm sick and tired of working for minimum wage for Walmart. You know what, I'm going to go educate myself with $500. I want to invest in a course online, how to make money online. They could very well do that in a capitalist society. You cannot do that in a socialist society because as you make more money, you're taxed higher and higher. So they're perfectly capable to say, you know what, I'm tired of this crap. I don't want to work for Walmart. But at the same time, Walmart provides benefits. They provide, an hourly wage that some of the 16, 17, 18-year-old kids or kids trying to go through college, they'd be out on the street selling drugs. And when they're given an opportunity to make some money, gain some gainful employment experience, they can be better members of society when they are ready to create more value in the market. So in a capitalist society, if you're either a consumer or a business. So when you're a consumer, if you're strictly a consumer and you're a W-2 employee where you're just getting a wage, when you're doing that is you're not taking advantage of all of what capitalism has to offer. People are just saying, you know what, I love the security of getting a paycheck every day. For me personally, I think that's the least amount of security because Walmart could very well say, you know what, Adam, we don't want you here today. Go take a hike. And they could totally do that. It's in their right with right to fire. But right now I'm taking courses and learning how to automate my online business. And I could perfectly do that in a capitalist society because it's a free market. The government doesn't dictate what I can and cannot do. So that's a lot more moral for me to create value for someone else and then to increase how much money I'm making. And I'm totally free to do that. Now, where I don't like with America, they de-incentivize work by raising how much you're taxed by how much you make. So that's very part of a mixed economy. You know, very command oriented. It's like, you know what, you're making too much money. We're going to tax you up the wazoo to pay someone who's sitting on their bum, not making anything. So that is very, I think that's a terrible thing, that someone who's doing drugs on welfare should not be getting my hard-earned tax dollars when they're creating no value. They're not being a productive member of society. They could very well be shooting up cocaine with that money. Not to say that all welfare people do that, but there's no checks and balances. They're not drug tested, and they don't even have to work. You know, I would love to just sit around playing Xbox all day, and I've heard people who do that because they say, oh, the government owes me my welfare check. Well, someone has to pay for that welfare check, and it's me as a hardworking individual, and they're not creating value. So you're taking away what capitalism is meant. Say, you know what, in a capitalist society, you're not creating value, you don't get rewarded. In capitalism, yeah, you're freely allowed to get rewarded for creating value. And it's not that difficult to become wealthy by engaging in courses on how to do an online business. And with capital, raising capital to do that, you can easily take out a loan. In a socialist country, no one's going to loan you money. In Islam, for example, they cannot charge interest on a loan. And I see all these Muslim countries, they have a hard time building factories and plants and building roads, because if you're not making money on your money, why would you give it to someone else and have them pay you back and you didn't make a cent on it? You're just wasting money. In capitalism, when someone owes you money and then you're buying money, as in they're getting 8, 10, 12% interest, you're making your money work for you in the form of an investment. And in capitalism, you're perfectly allowed to do that and then profit greatly from it. So I find that in capitalism, when you're gaining capital, you're raising funds for whether a worthy cause or for a business, people are there to help you win because they want to profit from you profiting by creating value, which in turn helps someone out.
All right, certainly. So we only got, I think we've only got a couple of moments left, so I might just make some sort of closing remarks on that. I think that, broadly speaking, your characterization of, you know, people being able to sort of freely move between working at Walmart to creating a small business might be a little bit flawed when you consider the fact that a lot of the people, considering that they're making so little at Walmart, are probably there not because, you know, they think that that's what their time is worth, but probably because they don't have a whole lot of other choice, right? Like, you have a lot of these people that are characterized by living hand to mouth. They probably don't even have, you know, the $500 that you saved up to be able to educate themselves to move beyond that. If you want to talk about a system where people are able to freely educate themselves and move up, I think that, like, looking at a socialist system or something that like Bernie Sanders proposes with things like free college education, where the government does pay for those sorts of things, I think is going to be much easier and much more compelling to say people are free to move between those ladders, right? I understand the conception that you've been making about a value for this entire debate, where you're saying that people are able to, like, freely determine what their own value is. I think that with things that, as you say, like education, like food, like basic sort of things, that we are actually able to intuit that these are sort of universalized values that everyone sort of needs, right? Everyone needs a roof over their head, everyone needs clothes on their back, and everyone needs to be able to eat, right? So I would say that within a mixed economy, where the government is able to make sure that those basic needs are provided for people, I have no qualms about, as I said at the start of this debate, I have no qualms about inequality being created or free markets existing for other things that you know, exist within society, as long as people's basic human needs are being taken care for. I think that what capitalism does is incentivizes a system where people, you know, that Walmart and other corporations have an incentive to keep people within the state where they are working very poorly. Because if you have a person who's desperate, then they're much likely to work for a lower wage. And that by keeping people within that system, you're much more likely to be able to cut costs on them yourselves and generate more money from yourself. I think that ultimately what happens is that within this system, that all of the instances where you pointed out to moral things happening, like people's freedom to be able to do that, people's ability to be able to, start their own business, social goods coming from that. That is not as a result of capitalism. That is a result of people acting on other forces, acting for a sense of community, a sense of goodwill towards other people, to lift people up out of that situation. What I think capitalism does is it ensures that it incentivizes the further creation of that inequality, because the people at the top who own all the money have an incentive to be able to do that in order to be able to continue to accrue money for themselves. And yeah, I think that's. Oh, is this timed at all, or?
I'm just doing the total time. Just one last closing thing. I don't have a college degree, and I know that I can learn a lot more from doing personal development and self-help and transformative education. I can increase my intellectual power to increase my buying power through creating value in the market. So there's plenty of resources online with $1,000, you can totally create an online business from scratch. And there's very easy to get a payday loan where you can then profit within a few months and then create more value. So in a capitalist society, you can totally buy money in the sense of getting a loan. So all in all, this was a great debate. I appreciate it. This was a fun experience.
Yeah.
I wanted to do a debate like this, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, this was good. I guess I don't really have any closing remarks apart from the things that I sort of opened up with, is that in terms of, I agree. I think that what you're saying is that, people, there is some opportunity for upward mobility, and that capitalism certainly doesn't restrict people's capacity to, actualize value for the community or do things out of the goodness of their heart. What I would just say is that my main perspective coming from this is that all the incentives in capitalism seem to point towards doing the opposite of that, which is why I sort of still hold my stance. But yeah, I agree. Thank you for this debate. I think it was really good. And yeah.